Welcome, everyone. I'm Loretta Garcia, one of the co-chairs for Contemporary Issues Forum for this year, along with Dale Miller-Hill. I don't see her on yet. We have next month on November 20th, we will be hearing from Mary Purdy, who has a blog on nutrition. She will be speaking to us on eating in an eco-friendly way. That's in advance of Thanksgiving. And then today's speaker is Linda Kohn. She's from the Board of League of Women Voters of Maryland, and she'll be speaking with us about strategies for getting out the vote just in advance of the November 8th election. So I will turn it over to her to introduce herself. Let me highlight the speaker. Let's highlight the speaker.
Should I jump in?
Yeah, hold on a second. Let me get
Okay, I'll hold on.
Highlighted. I don't know why I can't spotlight the speaker.
I got it, Loretta.
Do you have it? Can you see it? I can't see it. It's so tiny on my laptop. Okay, thank you.
Oh.
And then now you have control, Linda, of the PowerPoint. So go ahead and whenever you are.
Okay, I'm gonna take a minute and try share screen. We did it a minute ago and it worked.
Good.
So I'm going to, it looks like that's up again as the slides.
Yes, and if everyone can stay on mute during the presentation and then post your questions in the chat. We'll get them after the presentation.
Okay, great. Thank you today for joining this. I know it comes after some other sessions in the morning. I could see the agenda, so I appreciate the folks who are joining here today. My name is Linda Kohn, as indicated. I'm here from the League of Women Voters of Montgomery County. I'm struggling with allergies, so you're probably about happy now. This is on Zoom, but I'll do the best I can today. I am with the League, talking to you today on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Montgomery County. Recently completed a term on the board of the County League. I'm now currently on the state board for the League of Women Voters. And been in the League probably about 5 years or so. And excuse me, joined after I retired, where my career was in health policy is actually what I analyzed for Congress. But happy to join the League and participate in voting issues, which are very important to me. The League is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that advocates for voter education and voter empowerment. All of our work is done on a nonpartisan basis. And the League itself, the overall League, is 102 years old. It's been around for a long time. It was founded in 1920, just a few months before the passage of the 19th Amendment, where women obviously won the right to vote. And it would be nice after 102 years if our work was done, but unfortunately, it is not quite yet done. So what I'm going to cover today, let me click down one. There we go. What I'm going to cover today is who votes, who doesn't vote is the opposite of that. Those who vote and who don't vote. Why do people register to vote and then not do it? I just don't get that, but that happens a lot. Otherwise, turnout would be 100%. But people do go through the effort of registering to vote and then fail to do so. And then what get out the vote strategies work? GOTV is get out the vote. What strategies work? What strategies don't work? You know, here it takes 2 steps to cast a ballot in an election. First, somebody has to register, and that's step 1. And then step 2 is actually casting the ballot. Regardless of whether you vote in person, by mail, early voting, election day, if you register and don't cast the ballot, nothing happens. You might as well have not registered at all. There's no effect from it. And that's where get out the vote That's where get out the vote comes in. The aim is to increase turnout, to increase voter participation, to get more people to the polls. It's really, in that sense, a pretty easy definition, not a complicated one. Increase turnout. And as Loretta noted, my comments derive from a study that the local league did, where we looked at what get out the vote strategies work and what strategies don't work. And the reason we did that study is because we're not a large organization. We don't have a lot of resources. We're not very big. We're mainly volunteers. And so the question was, what works and what doesn't work? Because if we wanted to undertake any efforts, where we were going to get the biggest bang for our buck, where could we have the greatest effect? And that's why we did this study. We wanted to know what works, what doesn't work. So how many people are voting? This is turnout in Montgomery County. I have a little bit of data. Some is local, some is national. I'll tell you when I do it, which it is. This is county data. This is Montgomery County turnout. In recent elections, you can see across the bottom, it says 2014, 16, 18, 2020, and I put in data for the primary for 2022. The blue bar is primary turnout. That brownish, orangish bar, depending on how you see color, is general election, is November turnout. If you don't see color, the higher bar is general election, the lower bar is primaries. You can see from this that turnout generally is higher in the presidential elections. 2016 and 2020 are higher than the midterm elections of 2014 and 2018. You can also see that across all elections, turnout is higher in November than it is in the primaries. A lot of people in November say it's important to vote. You have to vote in November. Every November you should be voting. Well, there's other elections besides the one that happens in November to vote in. The primaries also matter. And you can see that the turnout is actually pretty dismal in the primaries. And if you look at those midterms, 14, 18, 22, that is, what do we got? 30% or less turnout, which is really pretty dismal in the primaries. Now, if I showed you this graphic at the precinct level, it would actually look quite different. So when you see, for example, in 2018, and I'm using 2018 because we're in a midterm election now in 2022, and 2018 was the last midterm election. So I look at 2018, and you can see overall voter turnout in November was a little bit over 60%. It was actually 63%. But the highest voting precinct had a turnout of 78%. And the lowest voting precinct had a turnout of 45%, didn't even hit 50% of people voting in that precinct. So November, and that was a November result. That was a November result. Think about what that primary would have been in some of the higher voting precincts and some of the lower voting precincts. So when you look at that overall turnout, recognize that the turnout is actually a bit uneven across the county. Now, in 2018, overall turnout in November was 63%. That's that brownish, orangish bar. Is that good? I don't think so. I don't think so. In 2018, there were approximately 650,000 registered voters in Montgomery County. So 63% turnout means about, more or less, 240,000 people didn't vote. They were registered and they didn't vote. So I'm not satisfied with that kind of a turnout. I think it needs to be higher. So who's not voting? Well, I'm switching over to national trends now because I wasn't able to find local data on this. When you start taking it by subgroups, that generally tends to be national data. So at a high level, people who vote tend to have higher incomes, higher education levels, and identify with the political party. People who don't vote take the flip of that. Lower incomes, lower education levels, and also though tend to be younger. Younger people vote less. So, but we know there's variation by race and age, and that's what this table shows. Again, that orangish, brownish bar on the top is overall rating, and the blue, the lower bar, the shorter bar, the lower bar is 18 to 29. So that is new voters and 20-somethings. That's who's in the shorter bar, the blue bar, the second bar. So what do you see here? Well, overall, white people have a higher percentage of voting. More people turn out. This is November 2020. More people who are white turn out to vote than people of color. And that pattern holds for young people as well. Overall, they vote at a lower rate, but you still see that racial breakdown and lower propensity to vote. And remember, this was November 2020. I don't know if you remember the news then, but people talked about this was record turnout year and the youth are turning out in massive numbers. This is record setting, and you can still see that there are those patterns there. So why don't people vote? Why do they go through the effort of registering and then not vote? There's lots of studies. Again, these are national data. There's lots of studies and polls and organizations that study why don't people vote. And the results are actually pretty robust across them. They don't vary a lot. And so what's the reason? Well, people say they're not registered. Got to register or you can't vote. People say they're not interested. They're not interested in politics. They're not interested in the election. They don't like the candidates. They're undecided on who to vote for. They're not thrilled with their choices. It won't matter. It's not going to make a difference anyways. I don't need to vote. I didn't have time. It was inconvenient. I didn't get around to it. So what you get from these reasons is why people don't vote is they're very disengaged. That's actually a pretty disengaged group. They're not interested. It won't matter. I don't know. I don't know. I can't find the time. It's very disengaged. It really is a disengaged group. But keep in mind that it actually isn't a split group, that people vote or they don't vote. It's not quite that bifurcated. There are studies that estimate about 25%, about a quarter of people never vote, just never vote. They just don't. The rest is split between people who always vote and people who vote occasionally. They vote sometimes, but not other times. They probably show up in presidential elections in November, but may not show up for primaries or for midterms. And if you think about get out the vote, if you can get people to be more consistent voters, you can really have a strong impact. You can have a strong impact. So people who say they vote sometimes, perfect audience, you can really start affecting voter turnout. Let's see, let me try to get this. Okay, so why don't young people vote? Are the reasons the same or are they a little bit different? Circle at Tufts is a group that focuses on youth civic engagement, and CIRCLE is actually an acronym that stands for the Center for Information and Research on Civic Learning and Engagement, CIRCLE. They study a lot on young voters and have a lot of good data and a lot of good information. And again, there's a variety of reasons why young people don't vote. And I'll tell you what the wrong reason is. The wrong reason is apathy. It is not apathy for why young voters don't vote. They care deeply about the issues facing their area, wherever they live, facing the country, facing the earth. So what's the problem? Why aren't they showing up? Well, for some people, younger people, they don't see voting as the effective way to get heard. They feel that it's more effective to go to rallies, to demonstrations, to protests, that's more effective to them than voting is. But compared to other voters, younger people are more likely to hit barriers. They hit the barriers to voting. They register, they fully intend to vote, and they don't quite make it there. So you know how you're going to lose those few pounds, you're going to exercise more, you're going to read this book, you're going to do some other thing, and something gets in the way. You don't just quite get there. That's what happens to these voters. So what's the problem? Living arrangements. Young people move a lot. Poor people move a lot. Young people move a lot. And every time you move, you got to re-register or update the information. It takes that extra step every time it happens. If somebody's in school or in a temporary job, they're not very connected to the area. So they may not know the issues on the ballot, who are the candidates, where the polling locations are, what's the voting procedures in this jurisdiction. They just don't know. They're just not that connected to the area. Work schedules can be a problem. It may be that somebody intends to vote, but they have an unstable work schedule, and they ended up the day they had designated, they end up getting called into work, falls apart. Or they couldn't get time off of work, maybe. So there's work schedules. There's work schedules there. Transportation can be a problem. A person may build their budget on transportation around what they need to do for work or school or whatever takes their time. And that's what they've got, either their metro built around or bus or whatever their schedule takes them. So early voting gives people a lot more flexibility on when and where to vote. That's great. But if somebody needs to take the transportation, that could be an extra ride. It's an extra metro ride. It's an extra bus ride. So now going to cast a ballot is actually going to cost them a few bucks to make a round trip on the transportation. It's an extra trip. So that can be a problem. They're often missed by the campaigns. Campaigns are going to go after who votes. Young people don't vote as often, so the campaigns skip them over. They don't do as much outreach. Basically, voting is a learned habit. You learn how to do it. And just by definition, if somebody's younger, they haven't had as much time to make it a regular habit, and have less experience doing that. So we've looked at how many people vote and why people don't vote. So what works for getting out the vote? And I know it seems like election day is very close at this point. It's just a couple weeks away. Early voting starts next week. Election day is about a little bit over a couple weeks. I mean, it seems very close. The reality is now, right now, is when you do get out the vote. The perfect timing for get out the vote is a couple weeks, 2 to 3 weeks before the election. So now is get out the vote time. You don't do it too far ahead. So what works for getting out the vote? So I'm going to give you the bottom line first. Okay. So this is the most important slide. What works? Needs to be personal. Whatever approach you use, it needs to have a personal touch, some contact at some level. Non-voters, low frequency voters tend to be disengaged. We just saw that. So engage. It needs to be personal. Family and friends matter. Family and friends are among the strongest influences of whether somebody votes. A message from somebody who is known or has some connection to the person is what's going to be really important. It's like voting is contagious. I decided to put that in because we're still around COVID. Voting is contagious. My neighborhood has a listserv. And while I don't know everybody, I don't. I know a lot of the neighborhood. I don't know all of the neighborhood. It's over 1,000 people. But we're all connected because we live near each other. The kids are in the same schools. We're walking the same streets with our dogs. I recognize names, even if it's somebody I haven't met. When I get a message on the listserv, I recognize a whole bunch of the names. And so I really use that listserv heavily for getting out the vote, and they're used to hearing from me. And as I noted before, get out the vote is most effective when it's done closest to the election. You really don't want to do it too far out. I noted before, and Loretta noted, we did a study, excuse me, on get out the vote strategies. And a book we relied on heavily, but not exclusively, is called Get Out the Vote, How to Increase Voter Turnout. And it's written by Donald Green and Alan Gerber. They are political scientists. And the advantage of this very thoughtful work is that they reviewed hundreds of studies and summarized them. They note which studies have very robust, strong results, which ones it's like, this is a good result, but it's a small number of participants. Be careful with the number. They really evaluate them all that way. So it's a very helpful study. I can read the studies. You can read the studies. They did it all for us. It's not the only source we use, but it is a source that was important to us. And I need to note, when we did this study at the League, we weren't just looking for ideas. We wanted to know what had been evaluated, what had preferably an objective evaluation, what worked, what didn't work. So we looked at a lot of stuff. There was nothing we weren't going to look at. But we really tried to give more attention or more weight to which were evaluated approaches. So this slide summarizes it. This is the short form. The most effective approach across all the sources we looked at, the most effective are methods that contact people in person. That may include canvassing, which means going door to door and talking directly to voters. That is considered the gold standard. That's what everything else is measured against. Is in-person contact and door-to-door canvassing. And it is not easy to do. And we were talking a little bit before this. Some of you have done that. It is not easy to do. You have to get the voter list, which usually costs money. You need volunteers, and then the volunteers should be trained. It's difficult, I won't say can't be done, but difficult to do in rural areas, maybe the further suburbs where people are spread out more. And it gets harder to do, but that is the gold standard for getting out the vote, is in-person contact canvassing. Phone banks actually can be equally effective or pretty close to that. Again, you've got to have a good list of phone numbers, and you got to get somebody to pick up a phone. But again, you've got that personal contact, that talking directly to somebody and hearing from them what concerns them, where are their questions. Again, it can be costly getting phone numbers. People don't pick up phones as much anymore. But if you're looking at effectiveness of a strategy for get out the vote specifically, mobilizing voters, getting them to the polls, those are your two best evaluated strategies that have been out there. Less effective, texts, direct mail, mass media. I'll talk about postcards separately. Texts are, again, you've got to get cell numbers. It's hard to get cell numbers. It's easy to block you, that kind of thing. But they're fast. You can get them out. I think the phone carriers are starting to come down on blast texts. If it's somebody you know, friends or family, yeah, sure, you can text them. But more broad-based, kind of those blasts out, I think the phone carriers are coming down on that. Direct mail, leaflets, the things that are left mailed to you or left at the door. The advantage is it's cheap. That actually is, across all the strategies, is considered a relatively cheap way to do it. And you don't have to confront voters. I'm a pretty shy person. I can leave somebody a brochure, but I don't have to talk to them. And that may make me, that may be more my comfort level. Mass media, TV and radio, you hear tons and tons of ads, certainly as the elections get closer. And they may have a purpose for name recognition, for elevating issues, that sort of thing. Forget out the vote, they're not very good. And the reason is because it's too impersonal. It's too impersonal. And it's very hard to specifically target the audience that you're trying to get to. So I sit here, I'm in Maryland, I'm hearing stuff in Virginia. I don't need to hear Virginia messages. Postcards. We were talking a little bit before we started about postcarding, and I know family who are friends who are very, very aggressive, assertive in terms of writing postcards and writing letters, and really, really make a strong effort to do it. And again, it's a modest increase. It's not a zero. It's not a zero increase. You can see the most effective increase turnout by 3%, the least effective turned out increased voter turnout by about 1% overall. So 1% isn't zero. The cost is more modest on postcards. If you're doing a postcard, there's not a lot of space to say something. If you know the person, you could say, I know you care about climate, make sure you get out and vote for the candidates that support that view. But if you're trying to do postcards, think back to how do you make it personal? How do you give a personal touch to it? Would be the way to try to maximize the use of those postcards. As I noted, we've got a range here of about 1 to 3% in terms of effectiveness. We did not find any strategies that can give you like a 20% bump. Just didn't see it. And so the takeaway message on that is this is actually pretty hard work. It takes a lot to get an impact, but don't underestimate even a small effect. As I noted before, in the general election in 2018 in Montgomery County, almost 240,000 registered voters didn't vote. They never cast their ballot. So what's that 1% increase? You can get another couple thousand people voting. I'll take it. I'll take it. So don't confuse a low impact with zero impact, and think about it over time, one election and then the next one and the next one and the next one after that. And that how even a little bit of effect starts making a difference. There's a couple newer strategies I want to touch on that are emerging. They're less in the literature at the moment, and I want to touch on them because I think they could be important ones. One is social networking. Sometimes that's also called relational organizing, which I think is about as dense a term as you can find. I really don't like that term, relational organizing. So I call it social networking. And the approach entails contacting people who you know, people who are part of groups that you're also in. Who's in your social circle? It could be family and friends. It could be people in your neighborhood. It could be at your church. It could be at a book club, could be at a class. Think of all of those people you hang around with. You know a lot of people. You may have a small group you hang out with, but you actually know a lot of people. They may not be friends, they may be acquaintances, but think about who's in your social circle. Now, the example on this I'm going to describe is from a group called Turnout Nation. That's the name of it, Turnout Nation. It is a nonpartisan group that tries to leverage personal contacts to increase turnout. So what they do is they ask participants, they call them block captains, and they ask them to make multiple contacts, so not just one time, 3 or more times, to make contacts with potential voters, friends and family, and give them nonpartisan voting information. And then over these block captains is another group that they call organizers. And the organizers help these block captains with messages, reminders, say now's a good time, get a message out on this, and keeps reminding them to stay with it, and then follows up and makes sure that those block captains actually did make their contacts. So that's what their structure is. They set up an online platform to facilitate things, but the block captains were asked to contact 10 plus friends, at least 10 people with a get out the vote message. And then the organizers followed up and made sure did they really follow through on that contacts. So you could think of that, it had all three features of what makes successful get out the vote strategies. It was personal. It took advantage of family and friends, people who are known to each other, and it happened close to the election. They had an outside evaluation done. They brought in some evaluators and they said, did this work or this didn't work? They actually did it in 4 sites. One site in Ohio had this very structured approach. 3 other sites in other parts of the country used the same approach, but had more informal check-ins, that sort of thing. So they did it actually in 4 places. What they found overall for these sites, the impact on voter turnout, the increase in voter turnout overall was 13%, double digits. That's huge. In Ohio, that had the highest, or they had the most structure attached to it. It was even higher. It was over that. It was higher in the teens. But even the other sites got double digit in terms of strategy. So the overall across the 4 sites was a 13% turnout. And what they felt it was having that kind of a structured approach is what made a difference. Another group did a similar approach. They used texting and they got about an 8% bump. So it was pretty good. But again, there's those constraints now on texting. Another successful experiment targeted young voters specifically. And they gave students some very hands-on, I'm at that second bullet, very hands-on experience to practice voting. They helped them complete a registration form. They helped them complete a ballot. They mocked up, with submitting the ballot because that varies in different places. This has been replicated a bunch of times. It's been done by many different researchers, many different settings. So it's been replicated. And the evaluations found that students who practiced voting increased their turnout by as much as 10%. Might have been closer to 6 to 8%. But you're getting up there, went up as high as a 10% increase in voter turnout. And the results, because this has been replicated, the results have been robust across different electoral environments and different socioeconomic settings. So that actually makes it very, very powerful. I think because most of us have voted many times, I voted many times, you probably have as well. You forget how daunting that first time can be. I was at an outreach event at Montgomery College around the primary. I was doing a voter registration event there for the league. And a student passed by and I said, "Are you ready to vote?" And he stopped and looked at me and said, "What do you mean?" I said, "You're registered, right?" Because the college does a lot there. He said, yeah, I'm registered. What do you mean? I said, "Do you know when and where you're going to vote? Do you have a plan?" And I learned that that's the way you ask the question. Do you have a plan? Do you know when and where you're going to vote? And he looked at me and said, no. He registered and had no clue what to do after that. That is fixable. That is fixable. There's a way to handle that. I think when we were setting this up, it may have been from Loretta, expressed an interest in social media. And I hope I got the right person there if it was Loretta. We didn't really look at that much in our league study. So I did try to do a little bit of looking to see what social media does. And the reality is there isn't a whole lot out there yet on the effectiveness specifically for get out the vote. Maybe reasons there for calling attention to issues like mass media, but specifically for mobilizing voters, there's actually not a lot of evaluated research out there. I assume that'll come forward later, but it isn't there yet. Certainly the advantage of social media is its reach. Can hit a lot of people with messages. And there's a lot, a lot of people, a lot of messages, probably even some of the messages are accurate. That's social media. And the hope is trying to reach a younger audience because younger people are more likely to be on social media than older folks. Going back to Circle at Tufts, they did do some work to try to say, did social media affect turnout among younger voters? Was that a good approach? And what they found that was that the combination of social media with traditional voter outreach, meaning in-person contact, the combination was the most effective. Only traditional campaign outreach contacts, only traditional voter outreach, or only social media, the traditional outreach, the personal contact was still more effective than social media alone. That's what their results found. So they hypothesized that the people who are most responsive to the messages on social media already have some level of interest in elections and voting. And that's why the social media may work for those kinds of groups, but it's already a little bit of a tuned in audience, but that was their hypothesis. So does social media have a role? Sure, it does. I wouldn't say to ignore it. Is it a magic bullet for getting out the vote? Nope, no magic bullet yet. I'm going to close and leave time for questions. I'm going to give one last slide. Oh, here's some selected sources. That's the Donald Green and Alan Gerber book. Circle at Tufts University. It's just, you put in Circle Tufts, it'll pop right up. Turnout Nation is easy, turnoutnation.org. And the study I talked about is posted on their website, and they've got some other materials there about how they do their training, that sort of thing. So that wasn't my last slide. This is really my last slide now. I got this from a friend, and I love the slide. We do not have government by the majority. We have government by the majority of people who participate. If you don't show up, you're not participating, and you're not influencing the decisions. So I'm going to stop sharing there, and I see something in the chat. I don't know if it's a question, and it looks like a question from Marcia. Young people as voters, are there any identified strategies for how to move engaged demonstrations with all of the passion to voting? Easy to understand how young people are cynical about the effectiveness of voting. So yeah, good question. I don't know if I have an answer to it. I think you answered the question there. How do you move from demonstrations? They're cynical about the effectiveness of voting, which may be why, in part, why they choose to turn to these other avenues. So I don't know. I don't have a magic answer to that, other than to think about what works and what doesn't work is hearing from family and friends. And if somebody votes in one election, there's a greater likelihood of them voting in a subsequent election, maybe not every election, but voting again. So it's important to try to get somebody out there, and what works with the in general in terms of voter outreach, voter turnout, is those personal contacts and from people you know, the family and friends. And really trying to think about how to exploit that. Sorry, Marcia, you want to get in there?
No, I wrote the question before you posted that slide about newer strategies.
Yeah.
And that seems to be probably the best information right now for how to get young people beyond their demonstrations.
Right.
I just remembered myself when I was in the university that I was a great demonstrator, but not a voter. And I thought it was so much more effective to demonstrate than to vote. And now I know better, but you know, I think it's a leap to move from being a demonstrator where you think everyone's paying attention to just going to cast a vote in the voting booth by yourself, you know?
It's an interesting question in terms of also trying people to understand that they can be confident in the voting process, that the rules are there employed, the people there are trained, the votes are counted. There's a lot of loss of faith in the voting process itself, the integrity of the elections. and making sure people understand that there is a lot of procedure and process around it. And that is part of ensuring the integrity of the process of voting. And that drop boxes are safe. And that's, you know, I mean, social media sometimes is effective if you can get out in front of some of the misinformation as opposed to chasing something after it's already said. But yeah, I don't know. You're saying, Marcia, just is that's the evolution of people.
Part of it is maturation, I think.
Right.
Right. If you have a question, feel free to raise your hand and we can have you unmute your mic. I do have a question about targeting voters, especially those who speak other languages. I think it was shown in Texas when Hillary Clinton was down there. There were no Spanish speakers in her entourage, and that was a real fail on the part of her campaign. Can you speak anything about what the League of Women Voters does for different languages?
I think that the League of Women Voters has put a lot of emphasis in terms of trying to reach Spanish speaking populations. And so the print voters guide that is sent out every election, primary and general elections, that lists all of the candidates and the issues and the ballot questions and provides nonpartisan information about the elections. That for the last couple elections has also been produced in Spanish. And we partner with a Spanish newspaper, El Tiempo Latino, and they distribute that. So we're trying to use their distribution networks to make sure that voters guide gets into the hands of Spanish speaking populations. The League also runs a voter hotline. It's going right now. It's about a month or so before every election for people to call in with any questions they have about voting. I don't know if I'm registered. I don't know what precinct I'm in. I don't know where to go, that sort of thing. That is also staffed by people who are Spanish speakers, so that we try to be able to respond to the different populations that call. So we do have those two specific efforts to try to reach those populations. But we haven't taken it to other languages. Marcia, were you going to add? Marcia and I work
Marcia.
together in the League.
Okay,
so
yeah, I saw Marcia's hand.
Yeah.
No, I was just going to add vote411.org, our website, because that website has a translate button on it. And I'm not sure how many languages it can be translated into, but it's the electronic version of the printed voter's guide.
Okay, actually has more than the printed voters guide, and is also a national database. You put in your name, you put in your address is all, no names, no identifying information, just put in the address. It'll bring up your own local ballot and where your precinct is, where you're going to vote, what you're going to see on your ballot. And it is a national database, which means you can tell friends and family who live elsewhere to also go into that resource as well.
Great. Any other questions?
I see one in the chat, and then I see one hand up.
Okay. Just see the one coming in on the chat. You want to go ahead and respond to that one? Read it.
Okay, the one in the chat says, what about mail-in ballots? They overcome a lot of the barriers, especially for young voters. Time, transportation seem to be almost a panacea. I love mail-in voting. I never did it before COVID, and I went on the permanent absentee list because I thought it was great. That was another study that was done by the League at the state level, and we looked at the procedures for mail-in voting in other states. And at the time we did the study, there were 5 states where mail-in was the predominant form of voting. Washington, Oregon, Utah, Colorado, Hawaii. There are more states now. California is in there as well. I know there's some more states that do it. What that means is that people can vote in person. Nobody is forced to vote a certain way, but as opposed to most people voting in person and just a few people doing vote by mail. In vote by mail states, 95+% of the people vote by mail, and the remainder, if there's a reason they need to, assistance is needed, that sort of thing, then there is a place where they can vote in person. Those vote by mail states systematically tend to have higher turnout than states that are not the vote by mail states. They just do. They just have higher turnout. Now, there are some states that are not vote by mail states that also have high turnout. Minnesota has high turnout, and that's not a vote by mail state. But in general, vote by mail does. At the moment now in Maryland, in the past, there was no excuse required. Some states, New York still, you got to put down an excuse. I had to get a mail ballot because I'm not going to be around on election day. Maryland has no excuse needed. I just want a mail-in ballot. I'm going to get that. Mail-in is equivalent to absentee. If you're used to the term absentee mail, it's now called mail, but it's the same term. It's the same thing. So no excuses needed. You do have to request it. And before, you had to request it each election year. So you could go in at the primary and say, I want a mail-in ballot for the primary and send me also one for November. That still is there. Right now, there's also an option to get on a permanent mail-in list. And I check that, and it means that I'm always now going to get a mail-in ballot and don't have to take the extra step of going in there and requesting one. If I change my mind, I can change my mind and say, no, I don't want mail-in anymore. I want to go back to doing in-person voting. So it's changeable. It's called permanent, but in reality, it's not permanent. It's your choice. It's the voter's choice. I agree completely that maybe that's a good voter outreach, voter education opportunity to make sure young voters understand better the mail-in ballot process. It is going to take some extra steps at the beginning when you first do it. And that may be a good outreach or voter education opportunity to make sure that people who are younger people who have less flexible work schedules. I'm a big fan of it. And I think the proof is in the pudding when you look at those other states that have do strictly mail-in voting, and they're among the highest in terms of turnout. So I think
Right,
it's
we have a
great
couple
option.
of, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Nope.
We have a couple of raised hands, Ursula and Mary Lou, and then I think you said there was one more in
Is there
the
something else
chat.
in the chat?
Or did you get?
I was going to ask a question about the mail-in ballot. If you get a mail-in ballot but decide you want to vote in person, is that possible, or you have to do the mail-in ballot?
It is possible. Yes, you got the mail-in ballot. You changed your mind. You thought you were going to be there. You are, whatever the reason is. You can go to in-person voting. If it's early voting, you can go to any early voting location. If it's election day, you go to your assigned precinct. So yes, you can, but you're going to vote provisional.
Okay.
Because
All
the
right.
system's going to come up showing that you received an absentee. I'm a check-in judge. It'll say ABS absentee. And they will ask you to vote provisional to make sure. Then it goes back to the Board of Elections. They're going to make sure you didn't go ahead and vote. You didn't mail it in, and additionally then try to vote in person. So
Okay.
you can do it, you're going to have to just give yourself a few extra minutes.
Okay, and then my second question is, if you want to locate the teachers' recommendations, the Apple ballot recommendations, can you get that online?
You can, somebody else who knows that better than I would, I don't remember the acronym, is it
It's a Maryland
MEA?
State Teachers Association.
MSEA.
Yeah.
MSEA.
Education Association. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a source. The league's voters guide, whether it's on paper or in line, goes through all the candidates, including Board of Education candidates. I found a source just this past week was University of Maryland, the School of Journalism. Talked to all across the state, talked to all the Board of Education candidates. And you can go in there and just say, well, I just want to know Montgomery County, and go in there and look at it, but they had it all posted online. So there's a number of different places to find out about that. But yes, I think it's msea.org, I assume, maybe .edu.
Right. Ursula, did you have a question?
I did. I didn't quite hear. It's Maryland State Teacher Association?
I think she said Maryland State EA, so it's probably Education Association.
Yeah.
But if you
MS
search Apple ballot,
Yeah.
Maryland, that probably is going to bring it up.
Yeah.
Okay. I'd never heard of that. That's interesting. My question has to do with how many states, and is there more of a movement to start counting early mail-in ballots so that we don't have this terrible lag time? And about how many states do start counting either as they come in or at least start the day of? And I have another question.
Yeah, that's an important question, because the greater the trend toward mail-in ballots, the slower that canvassing, this is a different use of the word canvassing, meaning opening the envelopes, the slower that process is. Here in Maryland, because Hogan had declared an emergency during 2020, he also said the ballots could be opened earlier. Current state law actually says ballots can't be opened until 2 days after election day, which is it's actually 2 days. And the reason is because they felt people worked so hard during election day, we're going to give them 1 day off, and then it's back to counting ballots. And that's how it ended up, is 2 days after election day. And the primary, which had, turnout across the county was, I don't think even hit 25%. And it still took a long time to get the results. So it's an impossible situation for November. Took a couple lawsuits, but right in Maryland in November, they will start opening the ballots earlier. I don't exactly remember the day, but it took a couple lawsuits. And then the General Assembly is going to have to go back and fix that up again when they get back into next session. And hopefully they'll do that. In terms of number of states, I haven't looked at it recently. Last I heard, it was up to 24 states allow, and I use that from National Conference of State Legislatures is the data source I use for that. And they look across voting election procedures across the country. It's a good group. And last I heard, it was up to 24 states allowed some degree of opening the envelopes and starting to canvass prior to election day. So you're getting about half the states are doing that now. All the vote by mail states automatically did that. That when your ballot comes in, it's automatically checked into the voting system, and they start opening them early. But it's different. But the how early states open it up varies. Part of the issue on opening these ballots early are, one, people to get results out early. You don't release results early, but you start with the ballots early. There's two ways to do it. One, you can open the ballot, take the ballot out and start processing the stuff and actually start counting, but not release any results, obviously, till after election day happens. The other way that also helps on the processing is to take the envelope, not open it. You make sure, what you do is you make sure that you check it in. You make sure that the voter signature is there. And that gives you the Board of Elections time to go back and cure ballots. Curing means that voters who forgot to sign the oath on their ballot have an opportunity to sign the oath on the ballot. And you want to do that on a sealed envelope. So to me, part of the reason that's so important of doing some level of processing before the polls close is for those voters who need to cure a ballot to be given an opportunity to do that. And I'm happy if that part happens, because at that point, once you start slicing, the machines open the envelope and you can, there's super fast scanners. It's not the scanner you're doing at the precinct. It's a different scanner, and they can process them through pretty quickly after that point. But it's important to me that that curing opportunity gets in there, and that means handling the ballots before Election Day has closed.
And I have another question.
Okay.
Early voting, do they tabulate those results on the day of election, or do they tabulate those results earlier, but just not report them?
It's going to be on Election Day. And the reason is because at early, there's only X number of scanners. And so the scanners go from the early voting sites, and then they all get redistributed to the local precincts. It's all the same scanners. It's all the same scanners. So they have not closed the scanner. They haven't closed it. They haven't removed the flash drive with the votes on it yet. That happens on Election Day. So no, they are not tabulated prior.
So in Maryland, if you vote early, then that machine continues to be used
Through Election Day.
Oh, that's interesting.
Through Election Day. That is actually why it is current law in Maryland that early voting has to end, whatever it is, 4 or 5 days before Election Day. It's because the equipment all has to get moved around. The scanners have to move around, the poll books have to move around, everything has to get redistributed. That's why there's a break between early voting and Election Day. They only have X amount of equipment.
Okay, well, if there are no more questions, are there any more questions first? No. Okay, and so if there are no more questions, let's thank Linda Kohn for sharing her expertise and knowledge with us. We really appreciate your talking to us today, and wish everyone success in their get out the vote efforts.
Thank you all. Thank you all.
Thank you
tell
all.
it's an issue close to my heart.
And our next speaker is on November 20th about eco-friendly diet. Okay. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.